Welcome to Season 1, Episode 3 of Life Beyond Loss, the podcast. This is a guest show where we share the most amazing and inspirational stories of navigating grief and loss through to healing and transformation. I'm your host, Louise Kresick, grief and loss coach, and today we're talking to Stephen Webb about his life-changing accident when he was a teenager and all of the adversities that he's faced since then. We also talk about how to grieve mindfully and what that even means. Stay tuned for this awesome episode. On today's show is Mr. Stephen Webb. He is a bit of an internet sensation, I have to say, and he's an inner peace guide and has really helped me in being able to find my own inner peace. So Stephen, welcome to the show.
Hello, are you recording?
I am.
Just checking, because we did this last week, didn't we? And both of us did not record the show.
I know.
So everyone's going to get a special, super show this time.
Today is podcast take 2, which is it's going to be even better. It's going to be even better.
Internet sensation. I've never been described as that.
Internet sensation. I think you are. You've got an amazing amount of followers.
And my ego loves that.
So tell us and tell everybody who you are and what you do for those of you who haven't met you before.
Well, I'm Stephen Webb. I was going to say Mr. Stephen Webb. I haven't been called that for a long time. I'm Stephen Webb and I'm an inner peace guide. And through everything in my life that I've been through, with ending up paralyzed when I was 18 and being bankrupt and heartbroken and all the things I've been through in my life, I say eventually, like as if I worked towards it. I hit a rock bottom about 5 years ago, and me climbing myself out of that, I realized what was important, and that's where I found my inner peace, and that's what I teach people now. This is what I help people find. You know, no matter what you're going through in life, you can have that little bit of, things will be all right. Things will work out.
Yeah, and let's talk about this analogy, which I absolutely love and always resonated with me, about the family barbecue. Tell everybody about this analogy.
Mother Teresa always turns around and says, it's all right having inner peace or feeling calm and having compassionate and love and caring when you're here with me, but it's taking it home to your family. And I always think of that summer barbecue when you're there at your family and you've got that narcissistic family member that is taking all the attention, and you've got that family member that's winding you up. And it's always that it's quite tough to stay calm and keep your inner peace especially when you're around a large amount of your family. And I always think if you could stay calm at that point, and you could not be triggered, and you can allow everybody to be who they are, then you're doing all right. But most of the time we get so wound up, don't we, whenever we get together with family, or whether it's a barbecue or, the Christmas lunch when we start talking politics, or it's hard to just, it's okay. They're different to me. They're here helping me to find my inner peace and helping me they're pushing the buttons deliberately so I can find my little bit of serenity in all this, everything that's going on outside of us.
Yeah, and also, I suppose when your own conflict arises as well. So, when you're beating yourself up because you've recorded a whole podcast and you didn't press record, for example.
Oh, we do that constantly, don't we? It's a constant battle between all those thoughts of, if someone in the street was following us around, just telling us all those things that we have, you're useless, you can't do this, or this is bad. And we were just talking about our voices before we come online, didn't we? And said about we don't like our voices. You imagine if someone walked around constantly saying, yeah, you got a terrible voice, you're useless, why didn't you record the podcast, it's not going to be as good next time, and all these other things. And I read a story a couple of days ago, and it's quite interesting actually that you say that apparently there was a guy that paid someone $100 to walk around after him all day for 2 weeks. So he paid him $100 a day for 2 weeks to just constantly abuse him, constantly just in the back of his mind, behind him, just saying all these different abusive comments like you're useless, you're this, that, and the other. And eventually it turned his mind around completely that he ended up going, well, no, I'm not. No, I'm not useless. I'm really good. I'm good at this. I'm good at that. So the mind started arguing back with this person. And he started to think really positive and really completely different. But that's what we do with ourselves, don't we? We're just constantly like that narrator in the back of our minds, like the DVD narrator years ago. Can you remember them?
No.
I'm sure you remember. Well, DVDs, they used to have this, you used to be able to put them in and you could either play the film or you could play the film with the directors in the background talking about the film.
Really?
Yeah, it was like you had the director's cut and you had the narrator or the director's commentary. But that's what our lives are like. There's like a commentary narrative in our minds constantly going on in the back of our minds, telling us what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, judging us. And yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, because just sort of bringing the conversation back to loss and grief, the amount of people that come to me when they're in the midst of that grief, and the common thing is they want to know is to how to get rid of their grief, to push it away, to kind of push it down, or just to not have it anymore.
Yeah, that's the most common thing. We have these feelings arise and we just want to get rid of them. You know, I don't like feeling angry. I don't like feeling sad. I don't like feeling guilt or shame, or we just want to feel good. Lots of people think they want to be happy, but the reality is we just want to feel good emotions. It doesn't matter where they come from. We just want to feel good and we don't want to feel any of the bad ones. So the immediate thing we want to do all the time is push them away. And especially when it comes to grief or loss, we just don't want to feel that loss. We don't want to feel like part of us is missing or part of us is gone. And the only way we can see how to do that is to push it away, get rid of it. I don't want this feeling in my life. I want them back. And we do everything to try to go back to that place where we had them or had whatever. With my grief, I guess really when I was 18, I broke my neck. I dived into a swimming pool and I was swimming with some of my friends, and it was a heated lit up pool at night. And I can remember the time precisely. It was 10:31. And I got out the shallow end and I walked to the corner of the pool. I climbed up the wall. And as I walked along the wall, I turned to face the deep end of the pool. And I looked at my watch and it said 10:31. The old digital watches, so it was quite precise. And I dived in. I took enough oxygen or air to dive in and come straight back out. But I hit the bottom of the pool with the top of my head. And instantly, I lost all my feeling and use of my arms and legs. And I was there, I guess, near the bottom of the pool, not being able to swim to the surface, hoping my friends would realize something was wrong. Being a typical 18-year-old teenager, I'm sure I messed around on the bottom of the pool and, you know, the kind of thing we do. And everything kind of went, So it's really difficult to explain. Everything kind of went nice, and there was no feeling, there was no fear, there was no, there was none of all these feelings that humans have, all these rush of emotions. Suddenly everything faded away, and it almost felt like I was part of everything else, part of the water, part of the pool, and then everything come back when my friends dragged me out of the pool and I got help and I went to hospital. But over the coming months, the loss of what my life was going to be was quite difficult. But I was overrun at that point with, I wanted to get on with my life. It wasn't the fact that I could not walk again. It was the fact that I was stuck in bed. And I would rather get on with my life and get out of the hospital, even if I was in a wheelchair at that point. But my real loss came way later. You know, I was 40 years old, and I was in a relationship, and one morning I sent a text and I said, you know, why don't you reply to me as quick as you used to? And at that point, the text message come back saying, I don't know what I want anymore. And at that point, I knew exactly what that meant. You know, I'd had enough relationships split up to know that at this point it was a downhill journey. And I lost all feeling. Everything left my body. My thought, I had no thoughts. I had nothing. I was just, what I now realize is, some call it the dark night of the soul, where there's nothing left. So I spent 2 or 3 days like that. And then I was the most hurt. My mind was overthinking. I couldn't sleep. I found it hard to function any part of my life. And it took me, the reason behind this story is it took me about 2 years to realize why I was hurt so much, why I found it so hard to do anything in my life, and why after everything that I've been through, you know, losing my best friend when I was mid-30s, my bankruptcy, being cheated on, all those other things, and breaking my neck. Why did it take this one thing to make me hit rock bottom? And it was because my whole life was mapped out in front of me. I was going to get married. We were going to go on holiday. I never had to do the dating scene again. You know, I had everything that I ever wanted. And I was already living my whole life in my mind. And at this point, this person took everything away from me. So I had no future, no nothing. And that's why that was my real big loss. I didn't just lose that moment a partner. I lost the whole future. I lost every dream, every aspiration I had. Does that make sense?
It does. Wow. It's just like, wow, blows my mind. It's like so many kind of profound moments in the kind of the bigger picture, in the bigger story there, or like a series of, you know, sort of smaller stories, but almost more significant than looking at it, you know, as an overall thing, really. And it really does kind of resonate with me in a way that I think after all of the, you know, the loss, it's kind of that loss of yourself, loss of your, I guess, like your identity, as you say, you sort of happily trundling along and you know that you've got that future mapped out in front of you and how it's going to go. And then all of a sudden that moment, that curveball comes, and it's just completely, for me, just completely threw me off course. And when I came out the other side, I just didn't know who I was anymore. Would you agree with that? It's that sort of...
I would absolutely agree. And, you know, I'm so grateful I've still got both my parents. My nan died in a fire in, I think it was January the 1st or 2nd, 2000. And my granddad committed suicide. He shot himself when I was 12. Incidentally, on the year that I broke my neck, I attempted suicide as well. Luckily, I failed. It's one of those things I'm really proud of failing at. I'm still here. But what's really interesting is when I look back at all my losses, I say my losses, I'm sure they're not mine, but what I felt like were my losses. The only times when I really struggled was when I lost a sense of me and who I was, and I put everything in their hands when I wasn't in control of my life. And if we do stay in control of life, if we have the foundation of who we are, we don't need the sense of the external, whether it's people, places, things, and experiences. We don't need them to complete us. So, especially like in a relationship, one of the things we do in a relationship is we meet somebody and we feel like they complete us because they are the missing jigsaw puzzles that we cannot, or we find very hard to grow inside of us. And they say opposites attract. I don't see that's the case. You end up with somebody that brings out in you what's hidden. So if you're a quiet person that would love to stand on stage and would love to find your voice, you tend to be attracted to somebody that has already found their voice. So when we lose them, we lose a bit of us because we feel like they completed us. And this can be with a parent, this can be with anything. So it comes down to when I felt most complete, when I felt most myself and in control of my life, the loss did not affect me so much. But when I was 40, there was very little left of me. Everything else was making me happy. This person was the one that was completing me. And losing that, I lost me. Where was I to? Where did I stand? What was the point in me at that point in my life? And there wasn't.
And how did you get from that place of sort of that kind of understanding of having those things in your life complete you to this kind of new understanding of actually, this is about being clear about my values and my foundations, and that I guess builds your kind of resilience, doesn't it, as part of that? How did you get from what was the journey from that Stephen to this Stephen?
It's funny because we often hear the phrase that trying to find myself and all that, because we get to a stage and it's normally about 40. It's ironically Jesus, it was late 30s, Buddha was early 40s. Every single one of them, that they seem to go on this like pilgrimage journey. The overall picture is like the hero's journey. You see it written down everywhere. So how did I get out of mine? Well, it was a process, and first of all you're numb and you feel nothing, and then the feelings start coming back, and then you're mad and you have questions. And I had the most ridiculous, crazy amount of questions that you would never answer, and even if you asked them, you probably wouldn't get the truth anyway. I had the wisdom to know not to bother asking, and I had the gift that this person would not contact me, which was really a gift that I hated at the time. So after I got past the initial mad, my mind would just not stop thinking. So what I had to do, I was going to bed at night and I was staying awake for hours, and I ended up drinking. One night, it was like one Southern Comfort drink. And then a couple of days later, that wasn't working, so I'd have two. And with having the gift of carers, I had to ask someone to give me the drink. And when it became 2 drinks, and then at that point I was going to go, well, 2 weeks later, I'm going to have to ask for 3 now. That was mighty embarrassing. And it fears me to think what would have happened if I was able to pull those strings. So I recognized that I was on a slippery slope. So I had to find another way to sleep. I was going insane. So I found a book on my iPad, As a Man Thinketh. And I hadn't read since school because I had the paradigm that I was dyslexic and I couldn't read. And so I didn't bother. It took me about a month on and off to read this book. It's only like 40 pages or something. But it was a book that was wrote over 100 years ago by James Allen. And the whole book suggests that we are not what we think. And that blew my mind. That was like, wow, I have thoughts, but I'm not those thoughts. So then I started reading more and more books. And then every book just annoyed the heck out of me because they told me that I had to meditate. Here it is, the brilliant solution that everybody's telling me, every wise book in the world. And I find out CEOs and world leaders and Nelson Mandela, they all meditate. And I'm like, great, here's the solution. And I cannot do it. And of course, why couldn't I do it? Because I was a thinker. I would sit down to meditate, and within about 1.8 seconds, check Facebook, do this, do that. And I couldn't sit down still for 3 minutes without doing a to-do list in my head, without jumping to past, story, and everything. So I was getting really annoyed until the point when I thought, well, if everybody's telling me I have to meditate, perhaps that's what I have to do. And at that point, I really, really crammed down on sitting down and going, look, even if my mind does wander, even if I do think, perhaps that's okay. So I become okay with being a really, what I put in quotes now as a really bad meditator, because I thought at the time it meant no thinking. And of course, that's not the case, because your mind's designed to think. And your heart's designed to beat. You know, your liver's designed to filter what your heart's beating. And turning any one of those off, and you're not here. You will not exist anymore. So you don't want your mind to stop thinking. That's asleep or passed on. So I realized that the thinking is a good thing. That's good. There's nothing wrong with thinking. It's what we do with the thoughts and where we go with them. And that's what meditation taught me, is that I can sit there and go through a to-do list and smile and be okay with it. So I suddenly took control of my thoughts instead of them controlling me. And that's where the inner peace comes from. Suddenly you move from your head to your heart, because your heart and your body always knows. You know, we were communicating with nature just the same as my little Westie and my cats and all the other creatures on earth. We were communicating in that sense for millions of years before we were able to speak. And that's what we need to listen to a little bit more. And that's what meditation gives you. And that's what inner peace gives you, is that ability to take a deep breath and go, what's really going on?
Yeah, and I remember just thinking back to that book as well, that very first book that you read. And I remember you talking about it on one of your lives, and I did go and read the book. And it is a nice little short book, As a Man Thinketh. It's an old book, isn't it? But I think one of the things I remember in there, one of the things that stood out to me was about, I think it says, the circumstances which a man encounters with suffering are the result of his own mental inharmony.
Yeah.
And it really did kind of resonate with me in terms of, you know, how much suffering we do tend to kind of, you know, inflict on ourselves because of the way in which we think of our thoughts. And the mindfulness stuff has really, that sounds really good, doesn't it? The mindfulness stuff has really, really helped me, though, to just allow myself as well, and helped me when those grief emotions come up, to become more of an observer of those thoughts and not necessarily think of them as good or bad, and therefore then kind of allow them to cause the kind of suffering that I probably previously would have. Is that how it kind of like works for you?
Yeah, there was two things I realized, and it's exactly what you said there. I was the creator of my reality, and I know that sounds like a big meme on Facebook, but it is so true. We see a world out there based on how we interpret it within, and most of our pain, whether it's through loss or anything, all our pain comes from one thing, and that's not being happy with what's currently happening. But the reality is there's nothing you can do about what's currently happening. So if you point me to anybody that's in pain, they currently are in a place where they don't want to be. Now, whether it's a financial situation, situation of loss, where they're living, anything, they want to change something internally or externally. And what meditation and what this book made me realize is you can't do anything about that, but you are an observer of it. And then you got the second part is you can do something about the future because you're taking control of it. And the other thing you say about mindfulness and stuff, and it is just stuff. You said about there's no good and bad. And I love the difference between the concept of duality, which there's good and bad in the world. You know, if there's an earthquake and people die, that's a bad event. But it's only bad to humans because it's relative to us. Right now, the universe is crashing two galaxies into each other somewhere, and it may potentially be killing any kinds of life that might have evolved over billions of years there, and it would have no hope of surviving. The universe isn't going, oops, this is a really bad thing. It's just happening. And if we treat life like it's just happening and don't always put it into is this a good situation or a bad situation? We learn to accept things the way they are instead of trying to change everything and micromanage everything. Let's face it, there's 7 billion people in the world. And I try to micromanage every single one of them to think the same way as I do. And trust me, if that's your mission, give up now. It's hard work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I've lost my train of thought now. What was I going to say to that? I can't remember.
We were just about to change 7 billion people.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what popped into my head as well? As I kind of say to a lot of people as well, this idea of you are not your thoughts. And most people have this kind of, when they hear that for the first time, and I know I did, it was a little bit of a revelation kind of moment.
Yeah.
And then last night I said this to my husband and I got a response that I wasn't expecting. And he said, "What do you mean I'm not my thoughts?" I don't understand what you're trying to say. I don't get what I don't. And the more I tried to explain it, the more he didn't get it. He just didn't get it. So here's an opportunity, Stephen. I'm going to ask you, for my husband, and also all the other people out there that just don't get it. Where would you recommend for them to kind of, start? What would be a starting place for them to maybe just explore this a little bit more in their own way and, think about how we can kind of reframe this when we get into this place of, really, becoming I am the grief and that sort of thing?
Yeah, there's just before I go on to the two questions that we can always ask ourselves and that would help your partner, is we do believe we are whatever we're going through. So when we're angry, we believe we are angry instead of I am feeling angry. or I'm lonely, or I'm depressed, or I'm fed up, I'm grieving. And it's almost like it becomes us because we feel it's permanent. It is who we are. And the reality is, it's just a visitor. It's just, in this moment, I am feeling angry because of this injustice. Or in this moment, I am feeling lonely because I'm sat here by myself. And as soon as we realize that these come and go, none of it is permanent. You point me to one thought, one feeling, one emotion that is permanent. No one's yet found one. What is permanent is the observer, the silent observer, as my Australian friend would say. And I'm trying to think of his name now. I feel really bad, but names are just terrible. My subconscious mind always goes like, we'll forget all the names. And I'll go back there in a minute. I'll get his name in a minute. But there's a silent observer that if you ask these two questions, who is doing the thinking? And if it is you doing the thinking, who is aware of the thinking? And if you really think that, you cannot be doing the thinking and be aware of the thinking. And that will just help people to realize exactly the difference between I have thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. All you are is you're aware your heart's beating. You're aware of the bodily functions. And the brain thinking is just another bodily function.
Yeah.
So those two questions, who's doing the thinking? And if you come to the conclusion that it's you, then who's aware of the thinking?
Brilliant. I'm going to put those questions to him and I will come back to you, Stephen.
And the other thing, just to finish that, is anybody can read books all day long. I read so many books about waking up and enlightenment, about Zen, and they all confused me. They all confused me. And it wasn't until I actually sat down, and my first meditation was stare at a spot on the wall for 5 minutes. And every time your mind wandered, smile, thank you for the thought, but I'm looking at the spot on the wall. And that was my meditation for about 3 months. And it really worked. Because I become aware that I was looking at the spot on the wall and something else was doing the thinking. But you have to experience it. Anybody can understand stuff. I understand that salads are good for me and running and healthy things are good for me. But the knowing doesn't do anything. It's the doing and experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that is a fantastic note to end on, and I could actually talk to you all day, but I also am aware that you have an appointment. So just to round off then, where can people contact you, Stephen? How can they get in touch?
Well, the best way to get in touch with me is connectwithstephen.com, spelled with a V. You can find out about my YouTube channel, my Facebook, the Academy, everything on that page.
Fantastic. And you're also in the middle of writing the book, are you not?
I am. The book's called Choosing Nothing. It's going to be out later this year. I'm really excited about this. And yeah, you'll be hearing a lot more about it. Perhaps I can come back on the show.
That would be fantastic. I'm really excited about this book. I can't wait to read it. So yeah, definitely come back on the show. That would be amazing.
No pressure on my book then.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Stephen. It's been a pleasure as always, and look forward to having you on the show again soon.
Thank you. Take care, Louise.